Greetings from South Louisiana, Cajun Country. You're listening to the Southern Wild Camp Show podcast, powered by Campterra. I'm your host, Scott Owens, GIS analyst, forester, and woodsman. This podcast is dedicated to Deep South wild camping with some Cajun flair. So come on in, take a load off, stay a while. All right, welcome. Tonight's podcast, we are going to be talking about why a Southern-based wild camp podcast. So before we get started, I have a little preface here on the subject of the podcast. And the podcast is going to be a serialized format, meaning it will flow in order for the first season, and after which we will go into an episodic format. Also, the podcast is heavily catered to Southern wild camping in Louisiana, Mississippi, and East Texas. And the reason for that is because it's kind of like our stomping grounds. We know these areas. We know these places. It's where we have the most detailed knowledge of. And of course, this doesn't mean that you won't find some content here to actually enjoy and learn from. So with that said, I'm going to introduce my co-host here tonight. Why don't you introduce yourself, bud?
Well, I'm happy to be here. My name is Fernando, and my last name is Kundin. And Scott and I are colleagues from a long time ago, still colleagues, just different locations now. And this is an evening for talking camping stuff. Let's go.
Sounds good. Look, a little background. I'm going to go ahead and start first, and then I'll let you go. So a little background on myself. I graduated from LSU in forestry management, got my bachelor's of science in 1999. I then went to work for the Louisiana Department of Ag and Forestry for 2 years on what's called the SAFES project, which stands for Southern Annual Forest Inventory Survey. So we were trained by the U.S. Forest Service in calculating plots of forest over a 5-year period to come up with an actual uh, inventory of all forested lands in the U.S. And then I cross-platformed over to where I'm at now. I am currently a GIS analyst. I do a lot of mapping, remote sensing, aerial photography work for a local engineering firm. So that's kind of my story. I grew up hunting ducks in the marshes. Later on in my high school days, I started to venture out into the woods hunting wild turkey. And ever since then, I've been doing something in the woods. So what's a little bit of your background there?
Well, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm from Louisiana, and went to school mostly all in New Orleans, and went to college in New Orleans. Was going to be a biologist. The idea was to go work for Louisiana, Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I don't know,
Right.
do ichthyology, do birds, and transitioned over into things mapping, GIS, photogrammetry, et cetera, just because it started to pay the bills better. Fast forward to up to today, I'm working for the tax assessor's office in one of our local parishes, and yeah, I'm I'm chasing I'm chasing deer and turkeys now. I was an old duck hunter, and I still miss it,
Yeah,
but
me
that's
too.
just how things changed up on us.
Yeah. All right, cool deal. So, as we said earlier, tonight's show is why a Southern-based wild camp. So I've formatted this a bit, and although we're not going to be reading from our notes, we have notes. This is the first time we're doing a podcast, so hang in there with us. I promise you, we'll get to some meat that I think you'll enjoy, and we'll also get better at this too. So I guess we'll start off with that question I kind of had. It's like, is there a micro niche for a southern based wild camp podcast? And Fernando and I talked about it for a while. I've done some things that we'll discuss in a little bit too, and we've come to the conclusion. I've come to the conclusion that we think so, right? So what is wild camping exactly, right? So there's many definitions of it, but after reading a bunch of them, I've come up kind of with my own definition. And so my definition of wild camping is a term that's given to primitive or dry camping at an unestablished backcountry site without a fee, utilizing self-sustaining equipment while recreating lawfully and leaving no trace. Okay. And then this is going to open the floor, Fernando, to why, or we know that wild camping or dispersed camping, right,
Mm.
out west is king. Okay. So do we know why? Do you know why that is? Like, do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Oh, well, most everybody lives near on into the eastern half of the country. And, the west is all the federal lands, mostly BLM and Forest Service lands.
Yep.
You can go for days in one direction or not see another soul. So, what else is there much to do but to go camping, really?
Right, right, right. That is true. And I'm trying to bring up some stats right now, but one thing that I see is that out west, many of those national forest, Bureau of Land Management lands, they actually cater and market wild camping in general. And they do it in a very clever way that appeals to both hikers and backpackers, but it
Mm.
also appeals to the car campers and the overlanders.
Mm.
So it's like a wild camping site out west. It could be a backpacking site where you go on a 1, 2, 3 night, a week trip throughout the back country. You sleep, right? And you have wild camp spots. They also term it as being a wild camp or backcountry site for car camping or overlanding.
Mm-hmm.
So it has all the elements, meaning there's no public facilities at these spots, right? There's no services. There may be a fire ring, there may be nothing,
Right.
okay? But it's kind of lumped into the wild camping or dispersed camping. And then it's almost kind of like that a little bit out here in the East, in the Eastern United States. But it's like through hikers are doing more wild camping. Then you have, I'm not really sure what the Midwest does, but it's like there's something with the South, right? Here in the South, our national forests and some national wildlife refuges have the you can actually wild camp or disperse camp, but it is extremely difficult to find any information on it. You can go dive into the U.S. Forest Service web pages for national forests in Louisiana and Mississippi, and it'll take you forever to find out information. And when you do, it's somewhat vague. Okay. In fact, they never really say like the definition that I just had, but they'll say you can camp, but at an extent of maybe 14 days, and then you got to move.
Wow.
So it's insinuated that you're going out there and wild camping, but they don't actually say that, right?
Plus, they're
Um,
just not encouraging it.
no, they're not encouraging it at all. Um, so the state of wild camping here in the South, just like I said, we only have the National Forest Service and some of the national wildlife refuges where we can wild camp.
Hmm.
Those rules and regs are not easily found. Um, and another big thing here in the Deep South, hunting is king on free public land. And that'll be a topic for another show, and that is wild camping versus hunters, and hunting being competition, right?
Well, competition or cooperation or something in between.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, um, let's see. Let's get my notes. So
Yeah.
there's this. I I recently put out a survey in the La Miss Wild Camp Alliance group, which is a small group that I started basically for wild camping for locals in the state of Louisiana and Mississippi. Start small.
Sure.
Um, and I put out a survey there asking all kind of questions about wild camping here in the South. And one of those questions were, if you're someone who is here to take the survey, you're interested in wild camping, and um, what inhibits you from going wild camping? Or do you wild camp now? Many of the answers were, I don't go a lot, but I really want to, right? So I'm
Hmm.
like, so w- there were the usual statements. Oh, I don't have time. No one to go with. A few females actually said that they were concerned about going alone.
Safety
Like,
and security.
yeah, safety and security, right? And that is an issue. But guess what the number one answer was for why people here in the South, in our states,
Hmm.
here in Louisiana and Mississippi, um, that they weren't going?
Mosquitoes.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. It could be.
For me,
No,
it is.
but yeah, well in the summer, yeah. Um, but the answer was, I have no place to go. I have no sites,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm
And
thinking to
and there's
myself,
something there about real access versus the perceived access,
right,
because we have access, but it's just a little bit more complicated or a little bit more of a lift than if we lived, I don't know, in Utah.
right. But think about this: I don't have any spots to go.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
wild camping.
Right.
The whole idea behind wild camping is to go off road, off trail,
Right.
and beat the briars and find a place to camp. Okay. So this tells me a bunch of things, but mainly it tells me, you know, there's a massive disconnect here where information pertaining to dispersed camping is not getting out there, or folks aren't searching for it. Um, but you know, the proof there is in the pudding with those survey results, right?
Mm.
Um, so people want a wild camp here in the South. How can we solve this and give folks knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to go out and try and wild camp, right?
Wow. It's a learned thing. So people need to have a good example, or they have to be tutored or introduced to it when they were younger and sort of things of that sort. It's not something you can just read about in a blog or a book and normally just start. There
Yeah.
seems to be too many hurdles.
One guy was saying, he's like, well, I'm not sure what you think of wild camping is, Scott, but like what we like to do, what we think wild camping is we take the kayaks and the canoes down Black Creek in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
and we camp out on the sandbars. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, that's I
Right.
mean that's wild camping.
Yeah.
But then I asked him, I said, do you know whose property you're on when you're on the sandbar? He's like, no.
Right.
So, and it's part people that do some sort of primitive or wild camping, as we're speaking about. It's just something either they've always done and they did it one way, like this guy did, and that's what you call it. What I'd like to talk about is there's so many different ways to wild camp. We talked about them. So backpacking in out west, they have the overlanding, the car camping, the backpacking as well. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, wild camping is about less hiking and more spending time at the campsite. And what I mean by that is I want to spend a lot of time scouting and reconning a wild campsite that has the criteria that I'm looking for, that we're going to go over soon, and is aesthetically pleasing to my eye, because I like to spend time at camp, whether it's R&R, you're filtering water and doing camp chores, right? You're doing some
Mm-hmm.
bushcraft, you're doing your fire processing and gathering. There's a ton of things to do at camp. And what I like is, if you want to hike, set up camp and just go explore around you off the trails. Just go explore. Just, just start walking. Just start having a good time exploring. Lose yourself. Like, that's my idea of wild camping. And for a lot of folks here that I talked to, I did the survey with, their whole deal is stuck on being on a hiking trail and backpacking and then going off. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like to do,
Right.
this these things that we talk about here in the podcast will fit that too. But for me, it's not about I start here, I end here, and I got to get there. I have to put in the miles. I got to get there by tomorrow. And you just keep walking past everything, going down one trail, right?
Sure.
I want to sit there at camp at that spot and enjoy myself. Okay. Some of these people out west, they call it forest bathing. Well, whatever you want to call it,
I
it's a
haven't heard
great
that. Say it again, though.
forest bathing. You
Oh,
haven't
forest
heard of
bathing.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I have. I have.
Yeah.
I thought you said
So
forest stating. So go on.
no, no forest bathing, right? So for me, it's a place to recharge, unwind, enjoy myself, right? Get some quiet, get away from the cell phones, the computers, all that good stuff, right? So one of the ways um, that we can give folks or help folks with these knowledge, skills, and ability needed to go out and wild camp is by e-scouting and the wild camp site suitability criteria. Yes, you heard it, fans. Wild camp site suitability criteria. I've come up with 7 site suitability criteria needed for locating wild camp sites in the South based on actual forestry and geospatial industry principles, practices, and techniques. These are things I learned back in my forestry days. So these are things I continue to learn in the geospatial and mapping world, and Fernando's the same way. Um, so let's go over those 7 criteria. So number 1 is lawful public land access, whether it's free, paid, or permission based. Number 2, you must have a contiguous, mature forest, woodlands, or wilderness area. Okay. So contiguous means uninterrupted. So it's just vast woodlands. Okay. Number 3 is elevation change, habitat diversity, and edge effect. Number 4 is a water source, whether it be small forest ponds, lakes, creeks, streams, and rivers. Must have a road, trail, and access system. Now, it might be some some places that are managed are very rough, like especially, you know what I'm talking about, out in the Kassashi on those back mud roads where the gravel's like
Hmm.
gone and it's
Yeah.
nothing but mud. I mean, it's rough, right?
Well, it's
But
treacherous.
yeah, but there's access. Okay,
Correct.
you getting there, that's kind of on your own type thing.
Yeah,
um
you might need a tank, but you can get there if
yeah,
you want to.
exactly. So, and then the 6th one, we're going to have a whole piece on parking. But you've got to have a good and somewhat safe, decent spot to park. Okay. And the 7th bit of criteria there is mapping. Okay. These criteria, just like I said, are based on forestry and geospatial principles, such as aerial, aerial interpretation, timber and tree delineation, agronomy or soil classifications, climate and environmental status, elevation again, and streamside management zones. Um, Also can include wildlife conservation needs, wetland classifications, designated floodplain areas, and the list goes on and on. So we've we've kind of taken everything we've learned, everything that we just stated here, and then we are e-scouting on the computer. Folks like Fernando and I, who are in the geospatial industry, we have access to various data sets, not just Google Maps or Bing Maps or USGS quarter quads. We have multiple different aerial data sets, satellite data sets, vector data sets, and we use all of these tools to come up with what I think is a great way to locate a site suitability for a wild camp location. Okay. And I've been doing this probably for about, geez, 5 months now. And every 4 out of 5 or 6 spots that I e-scout using these criteria that we just mentioned, 4 out of 5 are good or great. And the few that I don't return anything on may have been that it's been recently clear cut. There's nothing there. Or uh, it may be a wall of briars, meaning it might be a 5 to 8 year old clear cut and there's just no woods there now, right? And it's almost impossible to get up to date aerial data. We have our ways, but we only have within about maybe, I don't know, what would you say, 3 to 5 years that we can really know,
Yeah, if you,
right?
yeah, if you can get material to evaluate for questions like these that are 3 to 5 years old regularly, you're doing pretty
Like,
good.
yeah, like that's good. Um, so there are hurdles to jump through. Um, there may be a massive bridge that's out, or Forest Service Road culvert that's been out for months and months and months, and it's huge, and you just can't get there. So it's things like that. So what I'm trying to do is perfect this e-scouting site suitability for wild camp locations and see how precise we can get these spots. Like this weekend, I'm going off. I have 4 spots that I want to go look at, and that'll go, the notches on my belt, so to speak, to see if those are adequate sites for wild camping, right? And that will also further the affirmation that this e-scouting site suitability works. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you're just not testing it, but you're just building confidence with it right now, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I'm doing. So then I had an epiphany about a wild camp report. So everything I just gave you the meat of, how can we write and organize a method of locating these wild campsites based on those criteria, right? And organize it in a way to give newbies that want a wild camp, or maybe let's say older folks who are like wanting to get back involved in the outdoors. They've been gone so long with kids, family, and work. They're finally at a place now where they're like, you know what, I have the time now. I'm ready to get out. I want to start doing some of this wild camp stuff. So I came up with this wild camp
Right
report
now.
that would like help folks uh, find their way, so to speak. And this report would include these sites that I e-scout, right, for them to go try, or it's sites that I've vetted and been to before and know that they're solid, right? And
Oh,
then it
yeah.
would
Easy
also,
is always better.
yeah, and then it would also include just some basic information. Okay, uh, a lot of times we may go off and we tell somebody, yeah, I'm going to the Homachita National Forest. I'll be going up that way. It's near Butte and Meadville, and that's it. But what about if you get stuck out there? So it's like,
Yeah, it's
yeah, do you know how to get
600,000
into?
acres, isn't it?
It's actually about, I think it's right at about 250,000 acres, I think, of
Mm-hmm.
actual
Okay.
land. So, I mean, that's a lot. So, we will go over what's in the report later, but on another show. But this is what we've come up with that we think can help get folks back to wild camping here in the South. Folks that really don't know how to get started, where to go. Okay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like folks out west. I mean, they just know, or they visit the national forest, and there's the big thing on dispersed camping and all the information and maps right there, print out, and boom, you're off and going. It's not like that here. Um,
Oh,
so what are your thoughts about what I just explained, kind of regarding the wait, did I lose my? I think I lost my mouse. We're having technical difficulty, folks. There it is. Wait, is it back? Yeah, it's back. All right. So, what do you think about the e-scouting wild camp site suitability criteria?
Well, the best idea and the way it really plugs into the information that you got from the survey, for example, that suggests folks want to do something, but they're not quite getting up and getting going on it, is that this criteria sort of gives you a template and a schema and a system. So it makes things a little bit easier. It's not exactly a 7 step process to success per se, but there are 7 steps to use as a guide, which is helpful because you're certainly not going to get 7 steps to scout an e scout camping location from the Forest Service or any kind of agency that's managing and has agency over these public lands that we actually have access to and can use.
Exactly.
So there's a disconnect there. We have access actually, and we have the rights being public land and more, but we don't know how to. And making a phone call sometimes doesn't necessarily help you out very much. So where do we go from here would be the question. But
So,
here's an approach. Here's a system.
yep. So, when I called the Homachita National uh, Forest, which is the Bude Ranger District, okay,
Mm-hmm.
in southwest Mississippi. Of course, I get a call, and it's, you know, little Miss Henrietta, who's been hired to answer the phones. Yes, sir. How can I help you? U.S. Forest Service. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to find out a little bit more about the dispersed or wild camping rules and regulations there on the home chitta. And she says, the who, the what camping? The
Mm-hmm.
dispersed and wild camping information. Well, I'm not sure what that is. What I can do for you is give you the ranger on duty's phone number, and you can give him a call. So I said, yes, ma'am, that sounds great. So she gives me the number, and I have this man's name and number somewhere. I know where uh, the Bude Ranger District number is, but I'd probably have to scour up this ranger. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a Sunday when I called.
And
So I
somebody's
call
working
this
on a
ranger,
Sunday?
huh? Yeah.
Someone was actually working on a Sunday.
Well, yeah, recreationists don't take off during Sunday. I mean, the weekends are the best times to go.
Hmm.
So, I
I'm
mean,
just,
and rangers have got to be. It's kind of like firemen, or I mean, they work shifts.
oh,
Um,
wow. I've
so
never seen one
I
on a
called.
Sunday.
Yeah. So I call this guy up, and of course, hello, my name's Scott Owens. I was given your number by Miss So and So over at the office, and I'm trying to find. She said I could contact you for information about dispersed or wild camp. Well, he made it known right then and there that he wasn't
Hmm.
too happy about me calling him on his Sunday,
Right.
and that. But he answered my questions though. He goes, "Yeah, yeah, you can
Hmm.
camp wherever you want. It's got to be 100, 200 feet away from the road. You can't camp on the trails." I mean, he was very quick about it, very short about it, but he did answer my questions. And then I said, "Well, what about carrying a weapon on U.S. Forest Service? Because that's a bit vague in y'all's information." Well, we follow the state's guidelines, and
Right.
if you want to carry, you can carry. I said, regardless if it's hunting season or not. Yes, sir. So I'm like, okay, thank you. So, it was kind of it wasn't a friendly discussion like I was hoping for. Like, I'd like to call
Mm-hmm.
back, I guess, during a weekday when I'm not interrupting anyone and, and, and just ask the same stuff again and see what I get. But since that phone call and scouring the internet, I've
Mm-hmm.
able to come up with information that I've put in this report that is very helpful. So that's just one of the stories there.
Well, I have
Um,
a slightly different story. I called up to Cosachi Ranger District, which is near Natchitoches, Louisiana,
right,
and I spoke to Ms. Darcy, and she was helpful, very friendly, but she had no information much to share. So I got in the mail a little while later a bunch of material that I could have gotten from the website, but she had a couple of post-it notes with handwritten notes on the post-it note, and it was a little bit helpful, but it didn't completely satisfy all the unknowns and ambiguities and minor questions that I would have had if I had a proper conversation with someone.
right,
So I'm about 80% where I want to be as far as knowing all the little details.
right. And there's so much gray matter that, you know, if you don't ask questions or the information's not there, when
Mm-hmm.
you go out there and you don't know and you do something wrong, and it's at that one time that you get caught or whatever, it's like, well, you know what? I couldn't find any of this crap. I did my due diligence trying to locate this information, and it's just not readily available. And I get why people are frustrated.
Well, it is an issue. I've been put off because of this kind of confusion and ambiguity. And then on some particular occasions, I was tromping around in just the same area that I felt like I didn't have the confidence to do what I wanted to do. And lo and behold, I see some other people doing some things that were blatantly against the rules.
Exactly.
Well, I didn't make a big stink of it and call someone up right away, but
Right.
what's really going on here is the next question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I see more state game wardens on state grounds, state wildlife management areas, than I see federal wardens. I mean, I never see, occasionally I see Forest Service trucks. I mean, you can't miss
Right.
those. They're those lime green looking
Yeah,
vehicles,
lime
whether
green.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, road crews or Ranger or something. But I'm up in the home of Chido a good bit, and I never see those vehicles riding around, right? Well, um, can you believe an hour has gone by already, dude?
Oh, yeah.
I,
It's 9 minutes past. Yeah.
I cannot believe an hour has gone by. Um, so,
Well, that's
folks,
part of this
listen,
issue.
yeah, if folks out there,
Trying to
if
get
you
a feel
guys,
for it.
right, if you guys are still with us and are starting to get a feel for what we're doing with wild camping down here in the South and realizing that there's a need to help folks to get out and us having some real knowledge, skills, abilities to help folks doing that with this wild camp services report and these 7 criteria that we think hold some merit, that we keep continuously testing, um, then we appreciate it. Stick with us. This is our first show. This is season 1, episode 1. So hang with us. I promise it's going to get better. And we have a host of shows lined up. It's a bi-monthly podcast. So before October's out, we'll have another show going. So I'm going to go ahead and run that outro. So that is it for tonight. I mean, Fernando, thank you for being here, brother. I appreciate it. Join us on our next show, where we will discuss what is a Campterra Wild Camp report and how it can help you find more wild camp locations. Please remember to subscribe and share the podcast. It helps, and consider leaving us some comments and a review. Till next time, we'll see you.